You'll find a Mets fan. Let's go. This is a Mets year for all your Mets here. Let's go. Bring it home. Bring it home. Bring it home
exciting, thrilling, awesome. Let's take a look.
Mets fans, welcome back to Talking Mets It Rob with another Mets off day report here on a Monday after the road trip, after the 3-game series in Boston, which I attended and was frustrated is the very least of it. We'll get into all of that very, very shortly, but don't forget, guys, to please hit on that like button. And if you're a new subscriber of the channel, please say what's up. Do not be shy. Mets fan or fan of another team, does not matter. All baseball fans are welcome on this channel. Just let me know where you are watching from or listening from. I always like to know where those subscribers are watching and listening. So, guys, here we go. Mets off day report. And the report is the Mets continue to beat themselves. Let's be honest. My number one phrase that I like to use with this damn team is let's be honest with ourselves. Let's be honest with this team. How many times this year have we talked about the New York Mets beating themselves? If it's defensively, if it's the bullpen not knowing how to throw strikes or getting simple outs, bottom of the order of teams beating us the entire time. I mean, look at the Red Sox series. I mean, it was basically the bottom order that destroyed us yesterday, and it continues to be the same thing. How many more times do the Mets continue to beat themselves, right? The errors during this Red Sox series, the throwing the ball around, and look at the series. The Red Sox are just as terrible, if not worse, defensively than the New York Mets, and the Mets found a way to beat themselves. This is another series just like the Phillies series in June, where the Mets should have easily took 2 out of 3, just like they did, were supposed to do against the Phillies, and they basically handed that Sunday game to them. The same thing the Mets did on Saturday night. And, even yesterday, for example, the Mets offense really didn't show up. But look at the offense on Saturday where, yes, it was late, but they showed up. They fought back. They almost came back. They had the tying run at the plate with Vogelback up. And we just missed tying the game by Vogelback popping out in foul territory. It's unfortunate, but it's reality. And you can continue to talk about this team's done. This team should be sellers. The optimistic Met fan might still think there's a chance of buying. Who knows? But the fact of the matter is, they are not going anywhere fast if they continue to beat themselves, right? The Mets gave Scherzer a lead. Scherzer gave it back, right? It continues to be the same old when it comes to Max Scherzer. Any type of big game, Max Scherzer had it in the palm of his hands on Saturday, knowing big game, you win this game, you win this series. Sunday is the luck of the draw. You'll take, if you lose, all right, fine, we won a series. But if you win and you sweep the Red Sox, you're going into the Yankee series on a 3-game winning streak. You're looking pretty good. And now you're going into a Yankee series that is crucial for both teams. Both teams are not playing well at all. The Yankees just came off sweeping the Royals, which is no accomplishment, but they did what they had to do. And now both of these teams need wins. Both of these teams are currently out of the playoffs. The Yankees are closer than the Mets, but if you really look at it, the Yankees have harder teams in front of them than the Mets do, right? The Mets, look, I was looking at it today. The teams in front of the Mets, and this is why it's so frustrating when it comes to the New York Mets. The Mets don't even have to play great. All they have to do is play better than average, a little bit better than good. And they would be right in this mix. The Phillies came back down to earth. The Marlins came back down to earth. The Reds came back down to earth. The Giants came back down to earth. All these teams, the Padres are finally past us. Like, it comes back to the same thing. And I said this 2 weeks ago. These are teams that nobody should be afraid of. These are teams that are not very good. They're good average at best. I would put the Phillies a little bit above average, above being good, a little bit better than that. But other than that, there's no team that I'm saying, oh, well, they're running away with anything. Look at the first wildcard team now. The first wildcard team a month ago were 5-6 games ahead of the second and third wildcard team. Now everybody's bunched together. Looking at the Mets scenario, they're 8 games, 8.5 games from the first wild card spot, and they're 7 from the third. That's why it's so frustrating with this team, because a couple of wins that they easily should have had if they didn't beat themselves could have changed everything with 2 series to go before the deadline. And that is the worst possible thing that you can have. If you're playing well and teams in front of you are still winning, there's nothing you can do except tip your cap and you go about your business or what you're going to do at the deadline. But because you're losing games, not because of the other team playing well, it's because you're losing those games because you're not doing your job. You're making stupid errors. You're not running the bases properly. You're not doing situational hitting. That was a big problem in the Red Sox series. Bases loaded, nobody out. All the kids were up, right? Not saying I'm going to kill the kids here, but they came up, bases loaded, nobody out, no runs. The following inning, first and second, nobody out, no runs. It's the complete epitome of the 2023 Mets. They continue to beat themselves. Well, yeah, but Shooter, and by tomorrow, the Cubs going to be behind the Mets, right? And Shooter, you also said the Padres were going to going on a run, and where did they go? They're behind the Mets now, right? So it fluctuates within a series very quickly. And again, this is why the Mets needed another one of those 6-game winning streaks, because I guarantee you go on a 6-game winning streak, I guarantee you'll be the team right behind the wild card team, because nobody's running away with it. Everybody has come back to the pack. Everybody's come back to reality. A month ago, the Marlins were running away with the first wild card spot, the second wild card spot, by about 4 or 5 games, and the teams on the West Coast were running away with the first wild card team or wild card spot. Look, all of a sudden, even all the way down where the Mets are at the moment, they're within 8.5 games of the first wild card spot. And I put this out on Twitter. If you don't follow me on Twitter, you should follow me because I said this yesterday. This is an observation. This is not a positive take. This is a fact. This is an observation. Look over the next, I would say, next 2 months, right? All the teams in front of us, the New York Mets play. I know it might not mean nothing after the deadline, depending on what we do. But the fact of the matter is, organizations, every organization, not just the Mets, I want you to make that clear. Every organization looks at it in this particular way. They see it as if you're within 5 games, some even might say 6 games of a wild card spot by the deadline, you do what you can to bring in help. What do the Mets need more than anything else? Bullpen help. We all know that, right? There's one option, right? The second option is if they do become sellers, I believe they got to be within what they are now, 7 games out of a wild card spot at the deadline. If they're that, I have no problem with the Mets being sellers. Because you see what the Braves just did? The Braves just gave 2 top 30 prospects for a bullpen arm. So for everybody who is killing me on Twitter that Robinson can't get back a top 10 prospect, you're fooling yourself. Now, that's something that the Mets have to determine over the next 7 to 8 days, right? The 8 days until the deadline. The New York Mets do well over these next 6 games, 2 against the Yankees, 4 against the Nationals. If they go 5-1, God forbid they go 5-1. If they go 5-1, I will guarantee you, because it's a trend with this National League, especially from the first wild card all the way down to where the Mets are, and it's far down. But the games are right there. Every one of those teams they face, every one of those teams have not played to the level that they did within a 2-week stretch. Every team, including the Mets, had a 2-week stretch where they played extremely well, right? The Reds, all of a sudden, everybody wants to be the Reds all of a sudden. Look what the Reds are doing. Well, the Reds came back down to earth after their Ellie De La Cruz hype went sky high, and then it came right back down to reality like all teams do. And that's where the New York Mets and other teams are, like the Cubs, like the Giants, like those other teams that are hovering around where the Mets are hovering around. These teams, and you got to remember, guys, the Mets, and you have to pay attention because people are not talking about this, and I brought this up once again on Twitter. You got to remember the teams like Chicago and San Diego. What if they decide, you know what? We're not good enough, so let's sell off some pieces like the Cubs, who have Stroman and Bellinger, who are 2 big talking points in the trade deadline spectrum, right? Well, they're looking at that right now, aren't they? Well, if the Cubs get rid of Stroman and Bellinger, well, Bellinger's been one of their better players, and Stroman's been their best pitcher. Well, if you get those off the team, what do you think the Cubs are going to do? They're going to lose, right? And and this is not me saying that the Mets should be buyers. In my opinion, they should be sellers. But the fact of the matter is, take your emotion out of it and pay attention to the field. Don't pay attention to the Mets. Because as bad as the Mets have played over a month and a half, why do you think the Mets are not even 10 games out of the wild card spot? Why is that? Because the other teams in front of them aren't that good. And they have 2-8 stretches. They have 5-5 stretches. The Miami Marlins, over the last 20 games, they won like 4 games, right? So those are the teams that everybody was like, oh, look at the Marlins. Look at the Marlins. Well, guess what? The Marlins are not even a playoff spot, right? The Marlins are falling very rapidly. And they're another team where I don't believe the Marlins are going to be buyers. I do believe the Marlins over the next 6 or 7 games, if they actually going to be sellers, because they got pieces that they can sell off. And the Marlins are known for doing that, no matter if they're close or not. So pay attention to the Marlins as well. No, Rocky, I agree with you. The Mets aren't that good either. But we keep on talking about, we're acting like teams are in front of the Mets are so good when they're not. I mean, reality check, people, they're just as bad as the Mets. Just because I think the Phillies are a little bit above the Mets. But we just played the Phillies when they were red hot against a Mets team that was terrible in June. And the Phillies barely scraped it out because the Mets couldn't catch a pop-up. That's all it was between the Mets winning that series or not. Like, let's not act like the Phillies, we went to Philadelphia and they swept us and they beat our asses. Because they didn't. Shooter, yes, they are. You see, you're too convinced that these teams are so much better when they're in reality, they're not. Every one of these teams had a 2-week stretch at the right time, right? The Cincinnati Reds were exactly where the Mets were about a month ago, right? They went on a 2-week stretch and it changed their season. At the current moment, the Phillies, the Giants, and the Reds are all tied for the third wild card spot. And again, the organization, and not just the Mets, this organization is going to look at the final 2 weeks of the season, and I can guarantee you a lot of people don't check the schedule at the end of the year. Who do the Mets play for the last 2 weeks of the season in September? No, you do jump 5 teams down, and you jump very quickly. You got to remember, there's 3 teams in front of us that are within 2 games from each other. You win a series and they lose a series, you're right where they are. But that's the even better part. They play each other. And you got the Reds and the Brewers beating up on each other. What you want, and it's a scenario where the Mets fans have to look at this situation. The Brewers are leading the NL Central. You want the Brewers to beat the Reds. If the Brewers beat the Reds, that doesn't affect the Mets because the Brewers gain more ground on the division, and the Reds lose a game in the wild card and they drop down. That's the whole point. Okay, Shooter, but the Red Sox also lost 2 out of 3 against the Reds prior to them playing the Mets. Baseball is baseball. Everybody can beat everybody every given day. If you don't know that by now, then you're not really watching baseball and you don't understand it enough. That's why I just don't understand. Like, people just assume that even with the A's even had an 8-game winning streak, right? It's possible. No, Shooter, they're actually a major league team that are underperforming drastically. Just like the San Diego Padres, who everybody considered the Padres so much better than the Mets, and where are they? Well, you don't have to believe that, but they actually are. There is how many games left, guys? You want to do the math? We'll do the math, right? We'll do the math. Since everybody wants to, claim, because the same people who claimed they were out 3 weeks ago and they were 10 games out ended up being 6 games out, and all of a sudden people started talking, oh, wow, it's really not over yet. If you go on a little bit of a streak, I'm talking about a 10-game stretch where you go 7-3. You go 7-3, I will guarantee you that the Mets will be within a few games of a wild card spot because nobody's very good in front of us. They're not that much better. If you don't realize that, have you watched these teams play? Or do you just look at the games and say, oh, well, look, they won? Yeah, Giants, D-backs, and Phillies, and they're not. And let's see, the Mets. Oh, wait. The AAA team that Shooter calls the Mets just swept the Diamondbacks, who were leading the wild card at the time, who were leading the NL West, right? Oh, the Giants. Didn't they just beat the Giants 2 out of 3? Oh, right. We forgot about that because, it doesn't matter now. But it will matter if you get closer to the wild card spot and tiebreakers matter. Remember that before everybody starts to go crazy. And also, the Phillies. Well, we've tied the season series against the Phillies after they took 2 out of 3. So it's not like the Mets are really playing that bad against teams that you believe are wild card teams. But it does not matter about the over 500. That means absolutely nothing. And that is the whole point. Like, the Diamondbacks are a good team. We all know that, right? The Dodgers are a good team. No, Shooter, it's simple math that you don't understand. The Mets are currently 7 games out of a wild card spot, right? Last month, they were 10 games out, and then they got it back. They jumped 5 teams within a week and a half, and they were 6 games out when they went on that little streak. This is not rocket science. This is simple math. Yeah, the standards are what they are, but just because you don't want to understand simple math and believe at anything, the fact of the matter is that the Cubs, who were behind the Mets 3 days ago, should they believe? Should they not sell? Because there's been more rumors about the Cubs trading Stroman and Bellinger than there has been about the Mets trading David Robertson or Tommy Pham or Mark Canha or Max Scherzer or Justin Verlander. Great, shooter, and I guarantee the Phillies' percentage was exactly what it was that time too. Derek, thank you. And again, tiebreakers matter. Or do we forget what happened with the Mets and the Braves? Oh no, we don't want to remember that because that season doesn't matter. I know, because nobody wants to talk about the Phillies until it actually makes sense. Where do we go from here, Bake? We go from here. You win fucking games. It's very simple. It's not that hard, right? The Mets beat themselves in that Red Sox series. I was there. I seen it. You don't have to be there to see how they beat themselves. Yeah, okay, so Nola, who has a worse ERA than Max Scherzer and Justin Verlander, yeah, let's go get him, right? Aaron Nola, who every Phillies fan said was their ace and was better than Wheeler, is now a guy that is not even going to be on the Phillies rotation next year. Yeah, let's go get him. Blake Snell, who's finally had a really good year in a contract year. Oh, by the way, the last 5 years, Nola's not clutch. Let's be honest, right? The last 5 years, can you let me know what Blake Snell was doing? Let me just realize that, because last year the San Diego Padres put Blake Snell on the block. So that's a guy that everybody wants all of a sudden, right? The same guy that is often injured, who hasn't pitched well in about 5 years, all of a sudden pitches well, and now you want him. Well, can we act like... Yeah, okay, Micah, that's fine. That's fine. But you know what? That whole Phillies team was hot. But you know what? Where is Nola right now? Right? This team's hovering in the third wild card spot. Where is Nola? Every time he faces the Mets beat him up. Nola's not a very good pitcher. He pitched 2 really good games, good for him. And then when he got to the NLCS and the World Series, he was a shell of himself. Yeah, easy. I agree with you. The Scherzer came up small once again. That's why it's so frustrating, because of the fact that we should have won this series against the Red Sox and we did. No, Mika, I'm not saying he's bad, but people are saying get rid of Scherzer and Verlander. The stupid people who want that to happen realize, and don't say, oh, just get a bag of balls for him, because your next year's rotation is going to be Senga and a bunch of misfits. And if that's what you want, go ahead. Don't waste your time with the Mets next year then. And that is the problem, what people don't want to realize. People just want to say, oh, trade Scherzer, he sucks. Well, if he sucks and he's washed up, why would another team, even if you pay his salary, will take him on and give you anything? It's worth it. Is it worth it to trade him for nothing and pay his salary? Or is it worth it to keep him on your team and pay his salary anyway, even though you're going to get nothing in return? So what is the point? Oh, David. Yeah, but Butterscotch, I understand that. They haven't proven nothing. But what have other teams have proven? Right? Last time I checked, the Cincinnati Reds, half the Met fans were like, wow, we should be like the Cincinnati Reds, who never win anything. All of a sudden, they're 2-8 in their last 10. They're 6-15 in their last 15. Like, can we actually pay attention to what other teams are doing? And you're only focused on the Mets because you watch them every day. Pay attention how badly the other teams are playing. Before, the Marlins, this whole month, have been garbage completely. Everybody can't, oh, look at the Marlins. Look how good they are. The Mets should follow them. Yeah, I know, because they're coming back down to earth as well. Philly's the same thing. You know, I think the Phillies are better than all the teams in front of them and behind them. And I'm not going to say the Mets are better, because they're not. But that bad Mets team nearly took a series from the Phillies. Basically, they handed that Sunday game to the Phillies. The Phillies were hot as hot can be when they went into that series. And the Mets handed it to them. The Phillies barely beat the Mets. Well, easy, I agree. And that's the most important thing, actually, right, with Scherzer. It's the freaking home runs. You know, he talked about his nonsense about, you know, he figured out something with his slider, hanging his foot, and blah, blah, blah. Yeah, wonderful. Well, what happened on Saturday? Because I was seeing balls fly all over the yard. You know what I'm saying? Like, we can't trust Scherzer. We can't trust, maybe a little bit more with Verlander, but I don't trust Scherzer in the big game. So if you don't trust Scherzer in the big game, I don't trust Scherzer in the big game. All the smart people who think they're smart and say, trade Scherzer, oh, wonderful. So pay the entire salary of Scherzer, trade him to another team that doesn't believe in him. But, hey, let's hit lightning in a bottle. And, hey, we'll give you a single A minor leaguer who is not even in our top 30. That's what you want to do? No. You're stupid if you believe that. That's the point. If you think Scherzer's washed up, other teams do. So why would they even give you any top 20 prospect, if that, for Max Scherzer, even if you do pay his entire salary? This is not a situation where Scherzer's pitching lights out. And you're like, all right, we know we can get something, probably a top 20, maybe even a top 10 prospect if he's pitching lights out. And if the Mets were playing bad and Scherzer is pitching really good, now we can talk about trading Scherzer. And also, guess what? Justin Verlander, who's actually looked better than Scherzer, and when you need him, he's actually performed, for the most part, recently, is getting interest from a team like the Giants. If you haven't read the Sports Illustrated report about Justin Verlander, the Giants are very interested in Justin Verlander. Now, with Justin Verlander, we can have a conversation about trading him. You know why? Because the Giants, a report have came out that the Giants, if the Mets pay most or all of his salary, something in between that, the Giants will be willing to give up top 20 prospects for Justin Verlander. That's when you want to listen to an offer. Because if you can throw in, like the Braves sent over a 10th and I think it was a 26th ranked prospect for a bullpen arm. You don't think they can get that for Verlander or even David Robinson? If that pretty decent reliever got two top 30 prospects, David Robinson can get you a top 10 at the very least, maybe even a desperate team, a top 5 pitcher. If you got to understand the risk and the reward, the benefit of trading certain players. Just don't trade him because you don't like him or he thinks he sucks. Because if you think they suck, they think they suck. So why would they give you anything for it? The whole point of trading somebody in this situation, if you become sellers, is to get something back that can help you build your farm system. I'm not talking about a single A pitcher that probably will never make the major leagues. That's what you have to really look at. Explosive, of course it will be. And you know what? That would be the best case scenario for the Mets. 1, you get a win and who knows. 2, you get teams believing in Scherzer a little bit. All you need is that one desperate team that missed out on starting pitching that was available. And the last option is the Mets. Remember 2015, and I go back to this all the time because it's relevant. Sandy Alderson had a couple of options a day before the deadline and leading up to the deadline day and time, right? Justin Upton, Jay Bruce, right? Justin Upton of the San Diego Padres, Jay Bruce of the Cincinnati Reds, and Yoenis Cespedes. Alderson was looking at Justin Upton and Jay Bruce more because it was going to trade down, send back to the other team lesser prospects. The reason why Alderson didn't want to trade with Detroit and Cespedes was because they were asking for our top prospect in Michael Fulmer. The Mets, at the last moments of the deadline, Jay Bruce and Justin Upton, both of their teams decided not to trade them. They didn't get what they wanted for that trade. And Sandy Alderson was basically bent over a barrel with the Detroit Tigers and Dave Dombrowski, because Yoenis Cespedes was the last one on the table, and if the Mets did nothing, they would have never had that run in 2015. So the Mets had no choice but to give up their top prospect in Michael Fulmer, who was the number 1 overall prospect in the Mets farm system and the pitching prospect that everybody really wanted to keep. But the Mets really didn't have a choice. That's what you're hoping for in this scenario with the Mets, if it comes to that. Yeah, Paul, My point exactly. Nobody's playing really well. If you really look at the last 20 games from all the teams that are in front of us, that is the scary part. And the embarrassing part about the middle of the road National League teams. And the Mets are a part of that. And that's what's sad about it. The Mets don't even have to play great. They can play on a 5-6 game over 500 trek and be with and gain ground on these teams. And that's what's frustrating. It has not a lot to do with the Mets. Again, a lot of the people that says, oh, well, look at these teams. These teams are good. Look at the teams in front of them. Matt tells me that if you have how many games left? What is it? 63 games left? And you're out 7 games. Last time I checked, that's actually possible. Or do we all forget 7 with 17 to go? Oh, right. Yeah. Well, I agree with you, Butterscotch. The problem is it will catch up eventually because they have no time. They got 6 games until the deadline. They truly have to go 5-1 or 6-0 to even think about not selling at all. Now, whatever you might believe they should do, obviously they're not going to do that if they go 5-1 or 6-2. Because I'm telling you guys this right now, book it, stamp it, save it. I don't care if you want to come back and get back at me later on. If the Mets go 5-1 or 6-0 over these next 6 games before the deadline, I will guarantee you they will pass 3 teams in the wild card and be with the last 2 teams out of a wild card spot in about 4 games, possibly 3 games out of a wild card spot. I guarantee you that. Because it's shown. The Cincinnati Reds went on a 2-week stretch where they went insane. And I'm not saying the Mets have to do that because all the Mets had to do was win series here. They didn't even have to sweep series. If they win series, if they would have won the Dodgers series and won the Red Sox series, they would have been within 4 games of a wild card spot because the Giants, the Phillies, the Reds been bunching back and forth. They'll win a game, they'll lose 2. They'll win 2, they'll win 1. They haven't really been gaining. And look, the Mets actually gained games on the first wild card spot over the last week. If you didn't realize that, pay attention to that because they were 10 games 5 days ago from the first wild card spot, and they ended up being 7 with them losing a series against the Dodgers and the Red Sox and a series win against the White Sox. It's crazy to me. Yeah, the Phillies got to play against the Orioles. I don't think, the Phillies can win because they can have their moments, but the Orioles are better. And again, we look back at it. This is why the organization, specifically the Mets at this point, the New York Mets, at this point, the organization is going to look at the last part of the schedule, the last 2 weeks of the year. The Nats just swept the Giants. Thank you, Christian. And there you go. The Nats just swept the Giants. The Giant team that everybody's like, oh, they're better than the Mets. Well, I guess they're not, right? I guess they're the same old mediocre team just like everybody else. And that's the point, right? The organization is going to look at it this way. If you're within 5 games of a wild card spot, teams are probably not going to sell. Maybe they might sell one of those guys, maybe a Tommy Pham, maybe even if the Dodgers want Mark Canha or something like that to free up a spot for Tommy Pham if he wants to play him every day, maybe get something back from Mark Canha. But if they're within 5 games of a wild card spot, the organization is going to say, look at the end of September in the last 2 weeks of the season. It's all Marlins and Phillies. So what you hope as a Mets fan is that the Marlins or the Phillies have that 3rd wild card spot because that means that wild card spot is in your hands. Has nothing to do with everybody else because all you got to do is beat that team in front of you. The Giants just lost 6 in a row. The Reds are 2-8 in their last 10. The Padres are falling quickly, just like the Mets. The Chicago Cubs have been playing better, but they're half a game better than the Mets right now. And all reports are they're selling. There's no doubt that the Cubs are selling. They're not going for it. So that's an automatic for the Mets if they play better over these last 6 games. They're going to pass the Cubs. The Cubs ain't keeping these guys. They're not passing out. They didn't even give Stroman a contract. where Stroman was looking for an extension. They're not giving it to him. They're trading Stroman and they're trading Bellinger. So look at the teams that are there. The Reds, the Giants, who are falling quickly. You got the Phillies, of course, and the Marlins. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. And you know what? And this is not a positive reaction towards the Mets. It's just reality that the other teams, which I'm trying to make you understand, just look at their records over the last 2 weeks. Nobody's played well. The Phillies went over a 2-week stretch where they're 4-6 and 5-5 over the last 2 weeks. The Reds struggling. The Brewers winning better and gaining games on the Reds. The Giants falling. 6 in a row they lost. The Nationals just beat the Giants, swept them. Marlins, I think they're 3-15 over the last 18 games, if I'm not mistaken, maybe 4-15. I mean, come on. Mashing, it's a possibility to look at, to be honest with you. Why not? That's a way to maybe better your team while trading somebody away that really hasn't helped you this year. Maybe you could swap McNeil for a bullpen arm that you might need. You never know. So, look, this is not positive reactions towards the Mets because they don't deserve it. But you also have to look at the fact that if you believe that the Mets are so terrible, why aren't they 10 games, 12 games out of a wild card spot? Because the other teams in front of them are playing just as bad, if not worse. Sorry, guys. My cat. Well, maybe it sounds like we're selling, but don't believe all the reports. The only report that I think that you can truly believe is that Giants were Verlander. Not because the Mets are 100% sellers. I mean, again, there's been a lot of talk where the Mets could be both, right? Like you said, you can trade McNeil and get a bullpen arm. You're kind of selling you're kind of selling McNeil, but you're gaining a bullpen arm, which is needed, right? I can tell you that getting a better bullpen arm by trading McNeil is probably better off because I think this lineup can do damage. Yeah, you need people to do better, but Alonso has had better at bats during this last series. They've been putting up a decent amount of runs. So I could say McNeil is expendable. Hey, if you find a team that can give you a bullpen arm, I'll take it. But we'll see. Again, every Mets fan would love to go for it and have a nice stretch here and say, all right, here we go. We got 2 months to go. Let's get it down. Let's bear down. Let's do our damn jobs, right? Because you all know if you go 5-1 and 6-0 over this last 6 games, I'm not saying all of you is going to be believers, but you're going to say, look at that. Nobody's in front of the Mets are really playing that well. Because you're going to tell me the Phillies, the Giants, the Marlins, the Reds, and the Cubs, any one of them are going to go 5-1 or 6-0 in their next 6 games? Probably not. So there's a guarantee that you're going to gain games on probably most of those teams, if not all of them. And again, I'm not saying it's possible, but it's baseball. Anything can happen, right? Let's not act like the second wildcard team and the third wildcard team did not make the NLCS last year, and the Phillies, who were the third wildcard team with 87 wins, made the World Series because they got hot at the right time. Again, I always bring this story up because it's relevant. I was with the 7-Line Army on a road trip with them at Philadelphia in the middle of August. Philly fans were walking out of the ballpark when the Mets were beating them down in that game. They were walking out of the ballpark, couldn't believe that this team that spent a ton of money is going to miss the playoffs. That was the same Phillies fans that sold out Citizens Bank Park cheering on their team. Yeah, well, shoot it. But to get to that point, and I just brought up that story because in the middle of August, which we're not there yet, in the middle of August, Philly fans were walking out of the ballpark because the Phillies, who had a little bit of a nice stretch after they fired Joe Girardi, started to lose games again. Remember, they were fighting back and forth with the other teams that were fighting for that third wild card spot, along with the Padres, the second wild card spot. We have to look at it that way too. Yeah, exactly, Christian. Shoot it. That's fine. The bandwagon or not, it's reality. The fact of the matter is that the teams look at it a certain way. The Phillies could have easily been sellers last year, sell off a couple of bullpen arms, maybe even a starting pitcher or two. They know that the Phillies were not signing Nola. Why wouldn't they trade him with an extra year left to get something back, right? No, but the Phillies kept it and say, listen, let's try to go for it. They kind of did. Remember, they made trades at the deadline when they were not playing that well. They were playing better, but again, middle of August. Go back to last year in middle of August. The Mets took 2 out of 3 of that series. And the game that I went to, I went to the game at the 7 line. The Mets won, I believe it was by 6 runs. And that was actually a Nola start, by the way. He got beat up. And Philly fans were walking out of the ballpark pissed off and frustrated with their team with all the money they spent. And that was at the time where they haven't been making the playoffs. So what did they have to believe in? They didn't start believing until they won their wild card series. Yeah, but honestly, right? And the reason why is because all you got to do is split against the Yankees. That's 1 win right there, and sweep the freaking Nationals. The Mets are technically better than the Nationals. Nationals are playing better, but beat them. You're at home, win those games. There's a lot of ways to go 5-1 here. You want to take 2? You want to sweep the 2-game series against the Yankees? Great. Then only win 3 games against the Nationals. Then there's a lot of ways to look at it. And this is not a positive take. The fact of the matter is, everybody wants to talk about, oh, look at the math, look at the standings. Yeah, I've been looking at them, but what you're looking at is only the standings. How about looking at the teams that are in front of you that haven't played well since the beginning of July? None of them have. There's not one of them that went 8-2, 9-1 in their last 10. None of them. The Mets have had a better July than almost every team in front of them. How about that one? It's possible. Is it likely? Probably not. But you have to take a step back and take your emotion out of it before we do that. No, easy. They probably won't. But can they take 3 out of 4? I don't see why they can't. You split the series against the Yankees. You take 3 out of 4 against the Nationals, right? That's 4-2, right? Not great. Maybe it'll gain you a couple of games. But look, if we're 7 games now, you don't think by the deadline we're 5 games? Okay, so what? I don't care about percentage. Percentage means nothing to me at all. I don't care about percentage because the Cincinnati Reds probably had a 0% chance of making the playoffs by the beginning of July. How did that change in a month? Not even. Yeah, Mika, look, I'm okay with selling if it makes sense at the deadline, but trading Tommy Pham is not going to get you much back. Trading Mark Canha is not going to get you a lot back. The only thing that of relevance that's really going to get you something back that could be impactful is probably David Robinson. So you have to look at it from 2 different perspectives, right? 2 different perspectives. One, how much are you really going to get back by the guys that people want to trade? Because if you want to trade them, that means they're probably not doing very well, right? So that means teams are going to take these guys on when they're not doing well. Doesn't make sense, right? And you're already paying the contracts of Scherzer and Verlander. If you trade them away, you better make sure you get something back. And I'm talking about a top 20 prospect at the very least. If you're not going to get that, it's not worth trading them because all you're doing is paying the salaries of guys that are not on your team. And if they start to pitch well for their other teams, everybody will be like, oh, look what happened. Look. Because that's what people will say. Well, John, the Mets have hit basically the same runs per game that they did last year. They're around, 4.39, I think the last time I checked. They're right around that mark where they were scoring runs last year. We all know what the problem is this year. The pitching. How many leads this year that starting pitching and bullpen have given up? A lot. But what you're not going to get an asset. That's the problem. You say who cares? But if the Rays say, hey, we'll give you a single A prospect that probably won't be here until 2030, you're going to be okay with that? That makes no sense. That's not worth it. It's not, because there's a pretty good chance that pitcher that they gave you, or that prospect that they gave you, never pans out. So you're paying the salary for at least this year and possibly next year. Of that salary, you're not getting nothing at all. It's a stupid trade. Be smart about it. Who's a quality? No, I'm not talking. I just said it. See, you're not listening. Robertson is the only thing you will get quality assets back. If not a top 5, definitely 2 top 20 prospects for Robertson. The Braves just got a reliever, and they gave 2 top 30 prospects for a guy that's not even close to being as good as Robertson. Again, it's not the point of selling that's a problem. The point of the matter is, if you're really not helping your farm system much, then what's the point? Now, if you get desperate teams at the deadline and they're willing to give you more than you actually thought you would get for some of these guys, hey, albeit, let's go. But again, what are you getting for Tommy Pham? You'd be lucky to get anything near a top 30 prospect, unless you get a desperate team. Now, the Mets would be smart to wait it out up until the deadline day and find desperate teams, because that's when you're going to get the most. Right? The Yankees were desperate for Chapman. The Cubs were desperate for Chapman. They needed a closer in 2016. Well, they gave Gleyber Torres up, their top overall prospect, to the Yankees. Right? You can find things like that. And again, there's not a lot of teams that are probably going to be sellers, so that helps the Mets as well. But you also don't want to be stupid and trade guys and not get any decent assets that's actually going to help you within the next 5 years, possibly even sooner. Because this is not the Kansas City Royals that can trade bullpen arms and trade Aroldis Chapman and, build over the next 5 years. The Mets are not doing that. Retooling, yes. You're not trading guys that are most likely never going to make the major leagues, because it's pointless. It's not really helping your farm system. Yeah, but I understand that though. But that's reality. It rarely happens. And the Mets shouldn't be one of those teams that should, let's just sell. Let's be smarter than everybody else, because it can bite you in the ass later on. Because for all the people that says, sign Giolito, sign Nola, sign Snell, do you really think that rotation with Sanger leading it, if you trade Verlander and Scherzer, is going to be a lot better? Oh, and by the way, McGill and probably Peterson are going to be one of those 2 guys as well. Yeah, let's go with that rotation, guys. Can't wait for next year. Let's be smart about it too. If you're not going to get better assets that you want for those players, especially if you're going to be paying big salaries of those contracts for those other teams that you're sending them to, you better get something back of relevance. I don't want to see you trade Max Scherzer, you paying his salary for this year, and if he opts into next year, and you get a prospect that's ranked 25th. What the hell is that going to do for us? Nothing. That's not worth it. Sanger's not a free agent. I'll tell you, everybody wants Snell, right? Because he had 1 good year and a contract year. Don't we learn a lesson with that, ladies and gentlemen? Learn your lesson for guys who hasn't pitched well in 5 years, who his own team in the San Diego Padres were willing to put on the trade block last year, but almost traded him, but got hot and did not trade him and decided to keep him. That was the same team that wanted to trade Blake Snell last year. He had a really good season this year, but you're not signing him for what he did last year, right? You're signing him for what you want him to do for the next couple of years. And he's not going to be cheap. I guarantee you he's going to be worth at least $25 million. So you're willing to give Snell a 4 or 5 year deal, a guy who can never stay healthy in his career ever since he left Tampa Bay? Can we be a little bit more smarter, except just looking at this year? Right? We don't learn our lessons. Right? How many Met fans wanted Carlos Rodon? Where are you guys? I guess you're not going to open your mouths now, right? Everybody wanted Carlos Rodon too, over Justin Verlander. How is that working out for the Yankees? At least Verlander pitches every 5th day ever since he came back. Well, Paul, that's the thing. That's where the Mets are really gonna. Urias, great. Urias, he has over a 4 ERA. Sanger is not a free agent. I don't like Urias. I don't, because in a contract year he's not pitching well. When almost every player not named Michael Conforto plays great or really damn good in a contract year. Be careful with Urias, because the Dodgers are counting on him because of all the injuries they have, and he hasn't pitched well. Pitched well against the Mets, and that's what everybody's looking at, but hasn't pitched well this year at all. That's the thing. And again, this is a situation where if the Mets get within 5 games of a wild card spot, I'm telling you this right now, organizations see that as a chance of making a wild card spot. You might not believe that, but a lot of organizations do. I mean, it's just reality. And look, we don't have to believe it, but the Mets have to weigh the situation. If they're not going to get back what they want, specifically for a guy like Robinson, you're playing with fire if you trade him for an asset that's really not an asset. For everybody who wants to trade people, we got to be careful with Billy Epler, because we don't know how he is as a seller. We don't know what he's thinking, what he sees. A prospect that we might think is good and he might not think is good. We got to be careful with that. So, for a bullpen that really needs arms, you better not be within 4 or 5 games and think about selling, because you're throwing away the last 2 months of the season, and that's not going to sit well with a lot of fans, and it's not going to sit well with some people in that organization. And that's going to be a problem. Everybody has to be on board, or nobody's going to have to be on board. That's the other problem in this situation. Because you got Billy Epler and his misfits that are under him. We don't know what Steve Cohen's telling him. Steve Cohen is saying, hey, listen, see what you can get. But it's got to be the right move. It's got to be what we want back. Too many teams, and we see it every year, make trades and don't get what they want back, and it screws them in the years coming forward, because that guy that you traded that you could have used over next year or even the year after, those prospects might not be as good and might not work out, and then you traded for basically nothing. We see this all the time with teams that trade with the Yankees. How many times do they trade them a player and says, all right, we'll take these prospects, and no Yankee prospects work out? You got to be careful with that. You got to be careful, because teams don't want to trade their prospects, even if they're willing to go for it. Sometimes they don't want to do it. Sometimes they might need a little bit of a push. Sometimes they might need a little bit of a reality check that they're losing out on other players that they could have had, and now you got them bent over a barrel because there's nobody left on the board, and the guy that is available that you have is the only guy left. That's when you can find a team and say, listen, the deadline's coming. It's an hour away. It's the only guy left that you need, because everybody else is off the board. We want this guy. If not, we'll keep him, because it's not worth giving up. Well, Rocky, we don't know, right? I can tell you that off-seasons trades have been pretty good. Off-season signings, for the most part, have been pretty good for Billy Epler. People kill him on the bullpen, but people didn't realize that he traded for Brooks Raley. He signed back Ottavino, which everybody was on board with. Signed David Robinson, and that was with Diaz healthy. If you would have had those 4 guys, who knows how much better this bullpen would have been? Ottavino wouldn't have to come in 8th and 9th innings very often. He might come in more in the 7th. You can't fire Billy Epler before the trade, because who's going to make that trade? Who's going to make the trades? Who's going to negotiate during the deadline? Another guy who has been under Billy Epler, who's probably had the same mindset. Steve Cohen's not walking into rooms and picking up phone calls to make trades. That doesn't happen. So before you talk about trading guys or firing somebody, who do you think is under Billy Epler? Guys that's been working under Billy Epler. So you're only going to replace him with a guy who's been under him. Steve Cohen's not picking up the phone to do that. Yeah, Snell's a free agent, but again, look at his last 5 seasons. It's been injury prone and not very good. This year, in a contract year, which is always scary when a player pitches extremely well, which Snell has in a contract year, yet the last 5 seasons have been injury prone and not very good. That's a guy you want to give a 4-year, $100 million contract to because that's what he's probably going to be getting. Be careful with that. And exactly, Snell never goes deep. I think the game he pitched against the Mets is the first time he went 6 innings all year. That's a problem. So, with that said, guys, tonight, 8 p.m. is the Mets Roundtable podcast. You guys know the people involved. If you haven't, please check it out. It will be at 8 o'clock tonight. We're going to go a lot over these topics. That's why I didn't get into very, very much detail because I want to have a conversation with my guys and, the other guys that are hanging out with me during the roundtable, the other co-hosts. So we're going to get really in-depth into that later tonight. So we're going to go over more about the Verlander to the Giants, 8 days before the deadline, Subway Series, the Mets Red Sox series, everything that we got to talk about over the next few hours. When 8 p.m. comes, check to the Roundtable podcast, guys. It's going to be fun. It's going to be probably very negative, but you also got to take a step back and realize if you're not getting back what you want, be careful with trading just because you want to trade them and just because it makes some fans happy. Because you're going to fall into a trap there. And if you get back less than what you should get back, you're not really gaining by trading that person, that player. And that's where the Mets are right now. Again, it's all going to come down to, and the Mets aren't going to make any decisions probably until a day before, probably 2 or 3 days. I would say sometime during the National Series, they're probably going to make a decision. Look, the Mets get swept in his 2-game series against the Yankees, all hands on deck. The Mets should, who knows what, then it's probably really in seller mode. But if the Mets split this series, you're still kind of in limbo here because you head into a national series that if the Mets play well, get 3 out of 4 or sweep, now you're talking about something totally different. The Mets are in a scenario now where they can't bite at being a seller too quickly or bite at being a buyer too quickly or staying pat too quickly because that can hurt them. Because if they made up their mind and says, we're going to be sellers, and their mind's already decided, and they decided this, and they're not doing anything until 2 or 3 days before the deadline, well, what if you win the next 4 games in a row? How are you going to pivot so quickly? It's a dangerous game. Since you've been taking calls because you've been a seller, all of a sudden you're going to be making calls because you're a buyer, because the Mets played better. It's a dangerous game. So I think they're on the line right now and say on that little line right now saying, all right, we got 6 games before the deadline. There's no rush to sell and there's no rush to buy. There's teams that want players on the Mets, but don't make a stupid trade just because you want to make a trade because you don't think this team's in any type of race. That's fine. I can get on board with that. But don't get bullshit back because it's going to hurt you in the long run. And I don't want to hear about, let's get a single A player for this player, and you feel good about that because we build the farm system. What's that building? Probably nothing. Well, home size, Gaussman chose the Blue Jays over the Mets. Go back to that offseason. Gaussman got a bigger offer from the Mets. He chose to go to the Blue Jays for a lesser offer. Check it out. There's reports all over the place. Just Google it. The Mets offered him another more years and more money. He chose the Blue Jays for less money and less years. So the Mets couldn't do nothing about that. And how good is Gaussman? How's he doing? That's who you want? Be careful. Yeah, Paul, they have to approve the trades. I don't think they will not. Like, if they're going to a contender where they have a World Series chance or a chance to make the playoffs and get into the World Series or get into the playoffs, of course, they're getting their money no matter what. They'll probably approve that trade to go to a contender. to get out of New York and probably to a lesser meteor-based team? Yeah. Gausman hasn't been good. He's been injured. That's how everybody won. So, look, guys, a lot of things can happen in 6 days, right? Again, there is no 4-2 is on the border. If they go 4-2 in their next 6, it's going to be up to the organization to see, all right, are we a few games closer to the wild card spot, or are we the exact same? If the Mets are 4-2 in their last 6 and there's still 7 games out, they'll probably be sellers and nobody should be complaining. But what if they go 4-2 and other teams aren't playing well and they gain 2 games from that? And now they're 5 games out at the deadline. What do? Either way, in my opinion, I'm not going to be mad either way. If you want to get some bullpen help to help this team, fine. If you want to be sellers, okay. I'm not going to go crazy. It is what it is. But if you have a 5-1, 6-0 stretch, and you really gain some ground in this wild cards, now you really got to talk about, all right, how we get better. Because, in my opinion, this team has underperformed, right? Alonso, Lindor, Scherzer, Verlander. Don't go down the list. Marte, McNeil. They play a little bit, even if they don't play to their back of their baseball cards, but play, I would say, closer to that. Well, this team is probably better than most of those teams. So we'll see. So with that said, guys, again, 8 o'clock tonight, Mets Roundtable podcast right here on the channel. We got Chris, we got Nelson, we got Hayden, and of course myself. There's a possibility that Chris might not be able to join, but he's going to keep me updated later tonight before the stream. But we will have a couple of guys here to talk all about the Mets situation. So make sure you tune in 8 p.m. tonight. So with that said, everybody have a great day. If you're not able to tune in later, have a great night. Enjoy the off day before we have a stressful Subway series for the next 2 days, Tuesday and Wednesday. With that said, have a great night. As always, Met fans, let's go Mets. I'll see you tonight, 8 p.m. Have a great night, guys.
Meet the Mets, meet the Mets. Step right up and greet the Mets. Bring your kiddies, bring your wife. Guaranteed to have the time of your life, because the Mets are really socking the ball, knocking those home runs over the wall. East side, west side, everybody's coming down to meet the METS Mets of New York town. Oh, the butcher and the baker and the people on the streets, where do they go? To meet the Mets! Oh, they're hollering and cheering and they're jumping in their seats. Where do they go?